All right, I'm going to go through a short tutorial here with different methods of working to basically try to traction the muscles around the hip. And this is sort of an odd thing, but a lot of people get all kinds of tightness around the hip joint, around the hinge of the hip. So basically, the muscles that shorten and contract to pull your knee up in the air. The thing is, around that joint, there's a whole bunch of muscles going in a bunch of different directions. There's a lot of tension. It's easy from the habits of movement that you have in your daily life for that tension to basically be too much in one area and not so much in the other. And it's hard to find a way to release that if the muscles are holding too much tone and you find that perhaps you're having trouble controlling how your legs move. There's some pinching around the hip. And this is just an idea to pursue basically to get some relief from that by engaging more tension in a direction that you usually wouldn't feel in the hip joint. And what I'm talking about here is basically when I'm lifting my knee, I'm just tensing up my hip flexors, contracting the muscles to pull the knee up, and everything just tightens up, all right? So maybe your knee goes to the side a little bit, maybe there's a tendency toward external rotation or internal rotation around the hip, depending on how your hip is actually structured and how the muscles are actually balanced. And a lot of times what can help to relieve too much tension that's basically just getting in your way is to introduce weight to the foot or sometimes kind of resistance to the foot, so that when you're pulling the knee up, something is actually pulling your foot down and also pulling the entire hip down at the same time. So you're basically trying to strengthen the hip joint in a very odd direction and get into some odd muscles that work around your pelvis and around the head of the femur. All right, so the first thing I'm going to show here is basically a method of using an elastic band to resist my leg as I try to lift my foot up off the floor. So all I have here is a bicycle in a tube and a 2x4. So I'm going to lift this foot, try to pull the knee up as hard as I can while I have the loop around my foot, and just hold on to the tension as the hip gets pulled down when I try to lift. Now obviously I'm going to be standing on one foot, so it's best to do this when you can lean against something. You can hold a pole, lean against the wall, hold a rail, whatever you like. But to come into this, basically I'm going to put the two ends of the band underneath this 2x4 and then just have enough of the loop. Now I'm going to go ahead and spin this around so that I can hook my foot and then just pull up from here. So I've got one foot on the 2x4 to keep it grounded. I'm leaning against the wall, and you're going to have to play with the angle a little bit. So basically the loop is around the ankle. I'm pulling the knee up, and this takes a good amount of work to hold the knee up. So basically my hip is being pulled down as I lift my foot higher and higher. And if I want a little bit more resistance, I can just pick up some of the slack, so there's a shorter length of the band, and do the same thing. So I'm stepping on the 2x4 to keep it down and now pulling my knee up. And this is a good amount of effort. So I can feel my hip being pulled down as I try to pull the knee up, and the muscles are tensing up right here. And this helps to create a little bit more space and a bit more resistance in directions that I'm not used to having right here around the hip. And here's the odd thing. I mean, I have to have something grounded pulling my foot down, so there's more effort as I draw the knee up. And I'm just holding on to this for time. Now, you're probably going to get tired after about 10 or 15 seconds, and I would recommend holding this for up to an accumulated 1 to 2 minutes. So maybe 4 times at 15 seconds, 8 times at 15 seconds, 4 times at 30 seconds, something like that, and going from one foot to the next to balance things out. And so this is probably the crudest method I know to come into this, but it's just about introducing some tension. It's not going to be a perfect angle. You can play around and maybe bring the knee out to the side, maybe pull it into the center, maybe play with the direction of your toes. And all you're trying to do is engage some tension around here to create more space around the hip joint, even when the muscles are working, and give yourself some relief from what you might feel from too much tension. I sometimes feel like a wadding up of the muscles, like they're really just getting too tight and kind of curling into a tight ball at the hip joint. And this definitely helps me a lot with that. So if you feel some sort of pinching, some sort of sharp sensation, this may be what you need to introduce to what you're doing to give yourself some relief. Now, you're not necessarily going to have to do this forever, but you'll probably want to start doing some bit of this every day for a few weeks at least, just to give yourself more consistent relief so you don't have to come back into this. All right, a second method of working with this. Now I'm going to be on the floor, and I'm going to tie one end of this inner tube, this elastic band, into a loop. And to secure it, I'm going to go ahead and put the loop around the handle of my front door and then pull the band from underneath, and there's going to be another loop around my foot, so I can just lay on my back and do this. And this is sort of the kind of thing you can do if you're at a gym using a cable machine that has some sort of cuff for your ankle, or maybe you have an elastic band at home and you can secure it to a pole, a stair rail, something that's not going to move. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up. I'm just hooking this to the handle, keep in mind. All right, so I've got the band underneath the door and I've got the door locked, so there's no way that's going to open while I'm pulling. So I'm going to tie off this end into a loop. And the nice thing about using an elastic band is usually there's enough friction so you don't have to worry about it coming too loose. So here I'm going to hook my foot and just come down to the floor. Now you can have your leg straight, you can have the other foot grounded, but you're pulling in. And as you draw the knee up toward you, this is still going to pull the hip in that direction at the same time, even as I'm trying to tense up and pull things in here. So it gets me outside my usual habits of movement. And you can always play with the angle, pulling the knee out to the side, bring it into center, maybe more tension, maybe pull the knee up higher and start from there. You could do this for repetitions, just pulling back and forth and pulsing against the limits of the resistance. And you're definitely going to feel this around the hip joint as well. All right, another way to get into the sort of tension around the hip is to find a dumbbell, or actually what I would prefer to use if I had one would be a kettlebell, because usually those handles are curved and it's easy to hook your foot around them. I'm going to do this barefoot. I would recommend you probably do this with a shoe on, because it'll be less strain with the metal pressing into your foot. I'm used to this kind of thing, so it's not too big a deal. But from here, I'm just going to stand with one hand on the wall, and then I'm hooking my toes underneath the handle of the dumbbell. And then from here, I'm just lifting up. Let me balance this out so I don't drop the sucker. And I'm just letting that weight draw my leg down as I try to keep it lifted. And I'm holding it's about 20 pounds right now. Now you can just hold for time. You can lower and lift. You can bring it up high and try to stay high and release your hand and see if you can keep things up higher than you usually would otherwise. There's a bunch of ways to work with this. And if you're using a shoe, a good way to secure a dumbbell, this is kind of down and dirty, but just use a little bit of duct tape, wrap it around the shoe itself, and that gives you something to lift from without worrying about the dumbbell falling down. And that's another way to start introducing another direction of resistance into the hip and get rid of some of the tightness and some of the muscles that might be limiting you here. Okay, the last method I have here for loading the hip. This is from a company called Monkeyfoot, and this thing isn't cheap. This is probably, I can't remember what I paid for it. It's probably somewhere between $50 and $100. But what this is basically a cuff. So you can put your foot into this bracket or a shoe, and then basically you clamp a dumbbell on the bottom or a kettlebell, something with a handle that'll fit into here, and then this goes around your ankle to secure the weight. And this can lift up to 80 pounds. So if you've been doing this kind of thing for a while or you need more resistance, this is a good alternative as well. It's not cheap, but it's not super expensive either, and it's pretty useful. So from here, I'm just bringing that little bracket down there to hook the handle. And now I'm putting my left foot into the Monkeyfoot. And I'm doing this barefoot. Most people probably do this with shoes on, but I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm barefoot all the time. So suit yourself. Now from here, I'm going to secure the cuff around my ankle. And then the same thing. So I'm lifting this up. I don't have to worry about dropping the weight. I can go much higher with the weight. And I can take this basically almost like a leg curl here, or basically just lifting from the hip flexor. I guess a leg curl would be from behind. But just pulling the knee up, maybe just holding weight for time, maybe lifting up and down. And again, introducing a new direction of tension into the hip. And with that resistance, that can balance things out and get your hips moving a little bit better, especially if you're feeling some limitation, again, with that pinching, that aching, that sort of bunching up around the hinge of the hip, which is pretty common, actually. Anyway, a bunch of ways to come into this, and I hope this helps and gives you some ideas to work with whatever's around you.